When Millionaire unexpectedly showed up at home, she was startled to see the black housekeeper praying with her aging Alzheimer's afflicted mother. What on earth is happening here? Is this a place of worship? The sound of David Thompson's voice reverberated like thunder throughout the mansion's hallway. After 3 months of traveling for work, the 42-year-old businessman had made the decision to surprise his mother with a visit, but he most certainly did not anticipate seeing that sight. Grace Williams, the 38-year-old housekeeper he had recruited 2 months prior, was kneeling next to the bed in the master bedroom. His 75-year-old mother, Helena, was holding her hands, her eyes closed, and they talked gently in a way that made David's blood boil. Grace got to her feet, nearly tripping over her own shadow, and said, "Mr. Thompson," with his footsteps resonating on the imported marble. David said, "I didn't know you were coming today." "Of course you didn't. You wouldn't be converting my mother's home into a place of religious brainwashing otherwise." Helena opened her eyes slowly, looking from Grace to her son in confusion. She had lost a lot of her lucidity due to Alzheimer's, but she still held tenaciously to her moments of clarity. She said, "David, my son, you're back." With a feeble smile and a shaking hand, he pointed to Grace. "Yes, Mum, I'm back. And I found this," he said. Filling her mind with religious delusions became necessary as a result. With her hands shaking a little, Grace inhaled deeply and asked, "How long has this been going on?" "Mr. Thompson, I can explain. Your mother was very agitated today, and when I asked how I could help, she asked him to do so." David said, "I don't care what she asked," and strode towards her. "You are hired to clean this house, not to indoctrinate a woman with dementia. You're taking advantage of her condition." The silence that followed was deafening. Helena looked between the two, confusion evident in his tired eyes. Grace remained standing, her chin lifted in a dignity that contrasted sharply with the humiliation David was trying to impose. "With all due respect, sir," Grace said quietly but firmly. "Her mother is not being indoctrinated. She was having an episode of severe anxiety and asked me to pray with her. That's what calmed her down." David laughed bitterly. "Of course, the maid knows more about his mother than I do, right? You're fired. I want you out of this house in an hour." Grace nodded slowly, but something in his eyes flashed for a split second. Not tears of defeat, but a spark of something much more powerful. She turned to Helena, kissed her gently on her forehead, and whispered, "May God bless you, Mrs. Helena. Don't leave, Grace." Helena tried to get up, waving her arms. "Please, she helps me. She understands me." "Enough, Mum." David held the elderly woman's shoulders. "You're confused. That woman was taking advantage of you." As Grace quietly gathered his belongings, David didn't notice the small digital recorder she discreetly turned off and put in her bag. Nor did he see when she quickly photographed some of the medications Helena was taking. Medications that, according to the medical notes she had accidentally found, should not be administered together. An hour later, Grace was standing on the sidewalk outside the mansion, taking one last look at Helena's bedroom window. The elderly woman was banging on the glass, crying while David tried to pull her inside. Grace smiled sadly. David Thompson thought he had gotten rid of a problem, but he had no idea that he had just awakened something much more dangerous. A woman who had not only witnessed years of medical and emotional neglect, but who also had the evidence to prove it. If you have a heart for stories of true justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened after this unfair dismissal will leave you speechless about the power of truth when she finally comes to light. In the 3 days following the dismissal, David Thompson felt particularly proud of himself. He had cleaned her house of unwanted influences and restored order to what he considered his personal domain. Sitting in his office on the 47th floor of one of Manhattan's most expensive skyscrapers, he hardly thought about her cleaning lady he had humiliated. Grace Williams, on the other hand, did not have the same luxury of forgetting. Sitting in the cramped kitchen of his Brooklyn apartment, he stared at the pile of bills accumulated on the table. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and at 38, starting a new job search would not be easy, especially without references from his last employer. "You'll get another job, Mom," said Marcus, his 16-year-old son. Walking into the kitchen in his slightly worn school uniform, that affluent man lost the greatest worker he had. With a sorrowful grin, Grace looked at the youngster who had been reared by himself after his father left them when Marcus was just 3 years old. Marcus was unaware that her mother had been doing much more than thinking for the past 48 hours. "I know, honey. I just need to think carefully about the next step." Grace had carefully examined the pictures she had taken of Helena's prescription drugs. Using her years of experience as a nursing assistant, a career she had pursued before taking on domestic work for more flexible hours, her results were unsettling. According to the medical rules Grace was familiar with, Helena was taking a mix of sedatives that should never be given to a patient who has Alzheimer's disease. The dosages were twice as high as what was advised for a person Helena's age and weight, which is even more concerning. Grace started investigating after opening his used laptop. She found what she was looking for in 30 minutes. The physician who wrote Helena's medications, Dr. Richard Coleman, has previously been barred from 2 jurisdictions for dubious procedures involving senior citizens. Nevertheless, he kept up his temporary license and practiced in New York. The words Helena had uttered during her lucid moments came back to Grace as she printed paperwork on her old printer. "I can't leave because of him. Won't allow me visit my pals. Declared, I'm a burden." At that same moment, 30 minutes away, David was engaged in a phone conversation that, had Grace been able to hear it, would have made her smile. Caroline Mitchell, his personal assistant for 5 years, remarked, "David, are you sure firing the cleaning lady was the right decision?" "My mother is confused," David curtly said, signing contracts without looking up. "Your mother called 3 times today, asking about Grace. She's very upset. She is unsure of what is best for herself. He is aware. The nicest part is that there are no workers that exploit her illness to promote her." But David's voice sharpened perhaps Caroline. "You don't get paid to question my private choices. Make sure the new cleaning lady I hire through the agency is professional and knows that. I will not put up with any inappropriate behavior." Caroline sighed on the other end of the queue. She had worked for David for 5 years and had witnessed his increasing inflexibility and control, particularly after his wife left him 2 years ago, taking half of her fortune and a significant portion of her self-esteem with her. Grace was in the middle of making a call that would alter everything. Investigations into elder abuse, New York State Department of Health. Patricia Santos is the investigator. "Hello, I'm Grace Williams. I would want to report an elderly woman who may have been the victim of medical abuse and neglect." For the following 20 minutes, Grace gave the investigator detailed information, dates, and supporting documentation that demonstrated the complainant's technical expertise and organizational skills. "These are grave accusations, Ms. Williams. The public holds Mr. David Thompson in high regard." "That makes sense," Grace said softly. "However, a doctor who has lost his licenses in other places is sedated beyond acceptable limits for her mother. A vulnerable elderly woman. I have proof. Send it all over via email. Within 48 hours, we will begin a preliminary investigation." Grace felt something she hadn't felt in days after hanging up. I hope. It was more than hope, though. It was the same sense of purpose that had always carried him through life's most trying times. She was reared by a grandmother who studied nursing at night and cleaned houses during the day after being born into poverty. In order to obtain her degree as a nursing assistant, she had held 3 jobs. She had taken care of terminally sick people who treated her like family, raising a son alone. Grace Williams was able to spot abuse and understood just how to combat it. David Thompson believed he had resolved a small domestic issue. He was unaware that he had just roused a woman whose medical expertise, elder care background, and painstaking recording were about to reveal not just her carelessness but a whole web of exploitation in which he was unwittingly complicit. As David sipped his imported cappuccino the following morning and made plans for yet another successful day of business, Grace sent 3 separate investigating agencies a 47-page email that included audio recordings, photographic attachments, and cross-references to medical rules. It was the first domino to fall. David simply was not yet aware that his entire meticulously built universe was going to come tumbling down in her exacting and resolute hands. He had totally underestimated the woman, because occasionally you find out that the person you humiliate was more than simply a cleaning lady. She had connections, expertise, and above all a strong desire for justice that had been stoked by years of helping those who had been abandoned by others. David Thompson was unaware that Grace Williams had been transforming her tiny kitchen into a veritable operating center for the past 5 days. Printouts of medical regulations, photos of prescriptions, detailed schedules of Helena's medication times, and a thick folder filled with information about Dr. Coleman that would make any investigators sick were all neatly arranged on the table. Marcus questioned, "Mum, are you sure this will work?" as he observed his mother underlining legal document sections with the accuracy of someone who had done this all her life. Grace grinned without raising her gaze. "Son, after 15 years of caring for the elderly, you realize that there is a big difference between people who truly want to keep him quiet and out of the way, and those who sincerely care about his well-being." Grace finally got the call she had been anticipating on Thursday morning. "This is Patricia Santos from the Department of Health, Mrs. Williams. A high priority has been assigned to her complaint. We would want to schedule a personal meeting to discuss the next steps. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? In response, Grace looked at her schedule, which suddenly had appointments David would never have thought to make. In the meantime, David was engaged in a conversation that, if he could hear it, would make Grace grin on the 47th floor of Manhattan. Mrs. Rodriguez, the new housekeeper employed by the organization, stated Mr. Thompson. Today, her mother is quite agitated. She is constantly pleading for Grace. Perhaps he ought to. Not at all. Without barely looking up from his computer, David abruptly interrupted him. Religious consolation and discussion are not necessary for my mother. The only thing she needs is expert cleaning. You weren't employed as a therapist. You were paid to clean. Ms. Rodriguez gave an uneasy nod. After just 3 weeks on the job, she was already thinking about leaving. The house had a thick, gloomy aura. Helena cried or screamed all day long. David viewed any attempt at compassion as insubordination, and the drug seemed to make her more confused than lucid. Grace and Patricia Santos met at a quiet cafe in downtown Brooklyn on Friday. Grace's prepared level of information intrigued the investigator. A Latina woman in her 40s with keen eyes and a folder full of notes. Patricia replied, looking through the paperwork. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've hardly ever seen a complaint that is so well documented and supported." "Are you trained in medicine?" 15 years as a nursing assistant, Grace said. "I have experience working in home care, hospice care, and nursing facilities. When I witness medical abuse, I recognize it." Patricia paused on a certain page. "He is entitled to this combination of drugs. This combination is not only useless, but also harmful for an Alzheimer's patient who is at the Helena Thompson stage of the disease. According to Grace, the dosages are also double what is advised. In order to spend less time with Helena's son, Dr. Coleman is essentially putting her into a vegetative state through sedation. You also mentioned having recordings." Grace took his phone out. Helena had flashes of insight, but David Thompson was unaware. "And she told me stuff during those times." The sound was really clear. Helena's frail voice murmured, "Grace. He threatened to place me in an institution if I continued to be a nuisance. According to him, I am a burden. That my death would be preferable. I don't want to die though. I just want to talk to someone, Grace." Patricia shut her eyes. "There's more, my goodness." Grace went on, moving to a different file. This was taken during a home visit by Dr. Coleman 2 weeks ago. He and David had a sad chat. "I need the dosage increased, Doctor. Lately, she has been acting rather irritably. David, perhaps we ought to think about cutting back on some of the drugs. Her mum is under a lot of sedation. No, she must maintain her composure. When I have crucial meetings at home, I can't have her yelling or creating a scene. Take any necessary action." Patricia wrote something down. "Mr. Thompson will face numerous challenges: medical malpractice, elder abuse, and potential collusion with a medical professional. Criminal charges are on the table. Grace gave a solemn nod. Could I ask you a question, Patricia? How long does it typically take to do an inquiry like this? Months usually. Her smile, however, was the first in the discourse given this degree of proof. 2 weeks, possibly shorter, if we can get Dr. Coleman to help us save his own skin. David was extremely irritated by a call he got the same afternoon. This is Dr. Martinez from Presbyterian Hospital. Mr. Thompson, we've got some inquiries on her medical care, which is why I'm calling. Is it feasible to arrange for an impartial assessment? David scowled. Who is asking the questions? Dr. Coleman is entirely capable. It's just standard procedure, sir, when there are worries about senior folks taking too much medication. Worries? How on earth can that signify anything? These charges are coming from whom? David hung up angrily. But, I'm afraid I can't tell you where the complaint came from. Her initial instinct was to give Caroline a call. I want you to find out who is accusing my mother of being mistreated. Maybe he stopped, or some distant family wanted money. He started to get a horrible suspicion. Caroline, do you still have the cleaning lady's contact details that you sacked? Williams, Grace. I do, but David, find out who she's now speaking to and where she is. Caroline let out a sigh. You seem a bit paranoid, don't you think, David? Being terrified of unreal things is known as paranoia. I'm terrified of very real things, Caroline, like resentful workers who don't know their place. David was unaware that he had misjudged her to the point where he couldn't even begin to comprehend the scope of what she had found and recorded, and that by making that call, he had validated exactly what Grace had wanted. For the first time in weeks, Grace was truly happy when she got a call the following Monday. Williams, This is Chen and Associates lawyer Michael Chen. I was referred to his case by Patricia Santos. In my 12 years of handling elder abuse cases, I can honestly tell that I haven't often encountered such strong proof. I want to act as his pro bono attorney. Pro bono is short for free. Helena Thompson's right to justice is not the only issue in this case. It's about bringing to light a system that enables rich individuals to entice dishonest physicians to conceal neglect under medical care. Grace took a seat. At last, she had company in her battle. I need you to comprehend something, Mr. Chen. David Thompson isn't the only one I want punished. In addition to making sure that no family ever again subjected a vulnerable old person to this kind of treatment, I want Helena released from her pharmaceutical prison. Michael's voice was forceful. Mr. Williams, when this lawsuit is over, Dr. Coleman will realize that a doctor who sells prescription drugs for social convenience is not worthy of wearing a white coat. And David Thompson will realize that humiliating the wrong person is not only morally repugnant, but also financially disastrous. That night, Grace was in the kitchen creating a future he would never see coming as David slept in her mansion. Certain he had solved a small domestic issue. In 2 weeks, when the medical board filed accusations against Dr. Coleman, when local newspapers acquired anonymous copies of the tapes, and when state detectives arrived on her door with warrants, David would realize that he had misjudged the woman, because sometimes you forget that invisible people can see and hear far more than you think when you treat them like they are invisible. And when she does choose to come out, she makes sure that everyone sees her and everything she saw when you didn't think she was important. Grace grinned as she gazed at the picture of Helena. She had saved a picture of the old woman, grinning from when she was still able to do so before her own son decided that her joy was a bother that required medication. At 7:30 a.m., the Monday that would alter everything got underway. When a persistent knock on David Thompson's mansion door roused him. When he opened his bathrobe, he discovered two State Department of Health investigators brandishing court orders. Thompson, Mr. Patricia Santos is my name as an investigator. We are authorized to examine Helena Thompson's prescription drugs and medical records. A formal elder abuse complaint has been filed. The floor vanished beneath David's feet. This is an error. The utmost attention is given to my mother. We need to talk to her and look over all of her prescriptions, sir. Now, David's phone rang as the investigators went upstairs. Her assistant, Caroline, spoke in a shaky voice. "Did you see the news, David? A report about elder neglect in high society is now airing on Channel 7. He said your name." David hurried over to the TV. "In our exclusive investigation into the pharmacological abuse of the elderly, we have obtained shocking recordings that expose how wealthy families use sedatives to silence inconvenient relatives," journalist Sarah Mitchell said on the screen. When David heard her own voice on the TV, his blood froze. She must maintain her composure. "When I have crucial meetings at home, I can't have her yelling or making a scene. Take any necessary action." The reporter went on to say that an anonymous source had provided these recordings and that there was proof that the lead physician, Dr. Richard Coleman, had been revoked from his license in other jurisdictions for engaging in similar activities. This is when David realized exactly who the unnamed source was. Grace Williams had gathered more than just proof. She had constructed a case that would publicly discredit him. The volume of calls on his phone surged. Board members, business associates, and investors all want answers on the accusations that are making the news. 10 in the morning, Grace's attorney, Michael Chen, showed up at the estate with a separate medical team. "I am the lawyer defending Helena Thompson in this medical malpractice lawsuit. Mr. Thompson, a court order requires us to have a medical evaluation right away." David made an effort to remain calm. "A vindictive employee that I rightfully fired is behind this witch hunt." "Do you mean Grace Williams, the nursing assistant?" Michael grinned icily. "The same expert with 15 years of elder care experience, who has methodically documented her mother's medication use at 3 times the recommended amount." The term nurse hit David like a punch. Grace was more than simply a housekeeper. He had totally underestimated her as a trained medical professional. The self-employed doctor, Dr. Martinez, came grimly out of Helena's room. "This woman is quite sedated, gentlemen. She is having trouble keeping her eyes open. I'm going to suggest hospitalization for supervised detoxification right away." David was shown a report by Patricia Santos. "Thompson, Mr. Our experts determined that the amounts of lorazepam, haloperidol, and quidopini her mother was taking could result in irreversible brain damage. Elder abuse is what this is." While Helena was being gently transferred to the hospital, David received a call that sealed his fate. "This is the State Medical Board, Mr. Thompson. An hour ago, Dr. Coleman was taken into custody for writing false prescriptions. He has given a detailed explanation of his arrangement. Grace Williams and Marcus were watching the news in their tiny Brooklyn kitchen at the time. Her eyes were filled with the silent satisfaction of justice served, not with malevolent triumph." Marcus exclaimed, "Mum, you really did it," with admiration. Grace gave a headshake. "I didn't do anything, son. I just documented the truth and trusted the system to do his job." He answered the phone. Patricia Santos was the one. "Grace Helena is reacting favorably to her therapy. According to the physicians, she might regain a significant amount of her lucidity if the drugs are gradually stopped. Her life was saved by you." 2 weeks later, David Thompson had lost 3 significant commercial contracts, was charged with elder abuse, and her reputation was permanently damaged. The medical license of Dr. Coleman was permanently withdrawn. However, Grace's permission to visit Helena in the hospital was the true triumph. David had attempted to break a lady he viewed as lesser, but the elderly woman, whose eyes were clear for the first time in months, clutched her hands and whispered, "Grace, I knew you would come back to save me." However, he found that he had underestimated a person whose intelligence, will, and sense of justice considerably outweighed his conceit. Sometimes you discover that the person you humiliate wasn't merely cleaning your house. She was observing, studying, and recording every bit of information that would reveal his true identity beneath the facade of respectability. After accepting 3 different employment offers, Grace Williams was sitting in his new office at the State Elder Protection Foundation 6 months later. As a nursing aide who had meticulously recorded a case of abuse with the accuracy of a federal investigator, her involvement in the Thompson case had become legendary among elder rights attorneys. Dr. Patricia Santos, who is currently her immediate supervisor, said, "Ms. Williams, in accordance with the procedure you created, we have received 2 more complaints. Excessive medication is used by wealthy families to manage aging relatives." As she arranged the reports on her desk, Grace grinned. Her desk at his own workplace, earning 3 times as much as she did cleaning houses. Many people were made aware of what actually occurs behind closed doors by the Thompson case. Still in his outfit from the elite school he currently attended, Marcus ran in. Among the several improvements in their life, did you notice it in Time magazine, Mum? In the meantime, David Thompson was heading out of town after yet another meeting with his lawyers when he handed her the story. The cleaning lady who revolutionized the elder care system. Grace's picture appeared on the cover next to the headline. When the invisible person becomes the most powerful voice. Following the loss of important contracts and lawsuits from other clients who questioned her integrity, her company's insolvency had become inevitable. She had sold her penthouse apartment to cover damages and charges. "My last remaining lawyer," David said, "a settlement has been offered by the prosecution. 500 hours of community service in nursing homes and 2 years in prison, with an 8-month parole potential, are also required." David gave a sour nod. After firing Grace for not understanding her position, he now found that his own position was far lower than he had anticipated. At the Geriatric Rehabilitation Center, however, where Helena Thompson had regained more of her lucidity than the physicians believed possible, the true triumph was taking place. The old woman clutched his hands strongly and with perfect clarity when Grace came to see her once a week. Helena said, "Grace, her dear, when she was there last. You know, one afternoon, when I saw how David treated him that day, I thought the world was really too unfair." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had witnessed the degrading treatment Grace endured, now served as Grace's assistant at the foundation. "I always knew she was special, but I never imagined that you would be the one to save me from his own son. It never occurred to me that somebody like you could totally reverse the situation." Grace looked out the window of his office, observing the city that had once made her feel small and invisible. "What David didn't understand," she said calmly, "is that when you work, caring for vulnerable people for 15 years, you develop something that money can't buy. The ability to see injustice and the determination to document it until the truth comes out." Michael Chen, his lawyer, called with good news, "Grace, the state legislation on over-medication of the elderly that we proposed has been passed. It will be called the Helena Thompson Act. You changed not just one life, but the entire system." 6 months after being humiliated and called just a cleaning lady, Grace Williams had become one of the most respected voices in the protection of the rights of the elderly with a salary 6 times higher, national recognition, and most importantly, the satisfaction of knowing that Helena was safe and happy. David Thompson, on the other hand, discovered that humiliating the wrong person is not only morally reprehensible, it is professionally suicidal. He had tried to belittle a woman he thought was inferior, but Grace proved that knowledge, experience, and determination always went out over arrogance and prejudice. The best revenge was not to destroy David Thompson. It was to build something bigger and more meaningful than he could ever imagine, using the very skills he had despised to save not only Helena, but hundreds of other vulnerable seniors. If this story of true justice touched his heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that underestimating people because of the jobs they do can be the most costly mistake anyone makes in this